Good morning, everyone. This is Rob Thompson, licensed agent with the agency and one of the admins in the Colorado Springs Rentals Group. I just wanted to jump online this morning and share a question I received the other day that I'd like to elaborate on. And that question is, who pays closing costs? And this is specific to the Colorado Springs market, and I want to emphasize that these are approximate numbers, and I am not a lender. Triple asterisk on that one. In the terms of closing costs, there are three terms you should be aware of. There's seller's concessions, there's closing costs, and then there's closing services fee. Seller's concessions are the seller's contributions towards a buyer's closing costs. They are different. Buyer's closing costs is those fees associated with a loan. For example, you could say the loan origination fee, the VA funding fee, the additional smaller expenses. Those are the closing costs associated with a loan. The closing services fee is a couple $100 fee charged by title. That's part of the closing costs, but it is a different definition, differently defined item than the closing costs, than the seller's concessions. So I just think it's important you be aware that there are three terms that people sometimes mix up when you're dealing with closing costs. There's seller's concessions, which are the seller's contributions towards the buyer's closing costs. There's the closing costs, which is the inclusive nomenclature for all those fees associated with obtaining a loan. And then there's the closing services fee, which is part of the closing costs. So back to the question of who pays closing costs. So say we list a home for $250,000. When we price that home, we're going to include, most likely, we're going to include some seller's concessions, some consideration for seller's concessions. So if you own a home and you owe $200,000 on it, it's listed for $250,000. Most likely, you've probably considered, or the agent has had this discussion with you about seller's concessions. How much are we going to concede towards the buyer's closing costs with an offer? Now, there is no, it's all negotiable. There is no specific number. I've thrown in $4,500 as a generic number that a seller may concede towards the buyer's closing costs. So say the home is listed for $250,000. You make an offer for $250,000 with $4,500 in seller's concessions towards your closing costs. Now your mortgage may be $260,000. Excuse me. You're gonna give the financing fees, etc. So the ultimate mortgage might be approximately $260,000. If you get $4,500 in seller's concessions, your mortgage is going to be $260,000 less those seller's concessions, which would be $255,000. So the answer, in my opinion, in my realtor opinion, not a lender, is both. Because the seller is accepting it in the form of reduced proceeds, but the buyer is financing those proceeds. So in a real way, I believe that both parties are ultimately paying closing costs. From a general market perspective, though, it may appear more so that the seller is contributing towards those closing costs, but it's from the proceeds that they're going to get from the financed loan. So I hope that cleared up some of those muddy waters, or at least armed you with some better definitions of what those different terms are. But it's super important that you know seller's concessions is the seller's contributions toward the buyer's closing costs. The closing services fee is just the fee to title for closing the loan. Thank you very much. I'm online this morning answering a bunch of questions, doing some searches. I see about 25 people in the queue. We're looking for information on housing, and I'm going to get those out to you this morning. I appreciate you all, and you rock. Have a good night. Have a good morning.